Welcome to the FAST Podcast, Financial Advisor Strategy Talks with Lara Galloway, SVP of Financial Education at White Glove. Lara provides advisors with an opportunity to hear from some of the best minds in the business. Follow along to learn quick tips to help you grow your business, from gaining new leads to keeping current clients engaged, and everything in between. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the FAST Podcast with your host, Lara Galloway from White Glove. Lara, what's going on?
Well, I know you're just as excited as I am about this.
I'm so excited.
Because
man.
I took you up on a recommendation to bring on a great guest that you've been doing some podcasting with. So
Yes.
Let me tell you, I'll tell our listeners, and then I'd love for you to chime in a little bit here, Eric, too. But my guest today is Christine Luken. And as the founder of the Financial Dignity Movement, I just love that. Can we just pause? The Financial Dignity Movement. How great is that? Christine Luken has coached hundreds of high-earning professionals, business owners, and divorcing women to pay off staggering amounts of debt and massively increase their net worth. I love this. She's the author of 3 books and host of the Money is Emotional podcast with Eric Johnson. All right. And Christine blends wise money management with emotional intelligence. Why don't you talk about this just a little bit, Eric? Because you brought the idea of Christine to me when I was telling you how I've just been nerding out over behavioral finance and loving so much that I'm learning from the speakers that I'm talking to and our podcast guests. You said, Lara, I've got the perfect person for you.
Yes. So here's the thing is that all 3 of us share a very similar background with coaching and consulting. And after coaching as many financial advisors as I have, one thing that I think that they many times miss is the behavioral finance piece in ways that there's so much emotion involved in finance, period, for families, for multi-generational families, for businesses. It's very, very difficult to get away from, right? It's ingrained in us. So I totally geek out with Christine on this stuff. And she's the pro. She's amazing with everything that she does. And I thought there's no better fit than the fact that, Lara, you work with so many amazing professionals as advisors, and you have so many resources for them. She's another resource, because if the client isn't working with, or if the advisor isn't working with behavioral finance with their clients, they're missing a big piece, and they could be missing a lot of opportunity. So this is something that needs to be addressed in everybody's practice. That's my opinion. And I think that you are the perfect person to bring more information to these advisors.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And without further ado, let me welcome you, Christine Luken, to the FAST Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to bring both of you with me everywhere I go to introduce me.
Fan club. Awesome. So I'm so excited to be here with you. And last week, Christine, I was driving to Indiana. I did some speaking for NAFA, one of our partners. And I was listening to your podcast, and I was just enjoying the heck out of it and hearing you and Eric talking. So to all of our listeners, if you haven't tuned in yet, make sure you hear the Money is Emotional podcast with Christine and Eric. You've got some great guests on there too. And I appreciate a lot about what you're talking about, kind of just demystifying this whole money myth. I know my background as a coach, we were always taught everybody has a money conversation, whether it's articulated or not, right?
Yes.
I would love just, I listened to the genesis of your podcast, and I'd love for you to share with our readers just a little bit about why you started this work, Christine, because what is it about money is emotional? Why does that even need to be said to start with?
Yeah. So my short story of how I got into this line of work, it's not because I've always done this stuff perfectly. In fact, it's like completely the opposite. I crashed and burned financially in my mid-20s, despite having an accounting degree. So I was the person that had all of the head knowledge. I knew what I was supposed to be doing. I was working for an accounting, or I was doing accounting in my profession, and yet I was bouncing checks at home. And I say it was because I allowed my heart to hijack my wallet. And what I mean by that was I was in a relationship with a guy who had terrible money habits. I mean, he was in and out of jobs and even in and out of jail. And I thought if I just loved him enough that he would change. And he did. He got worse. So at age 26, when most of my friends were starting to contribute to retirement and to build their net worth and get married, here I was watching the implosion of my 7-year relationship. And I jokingly say, if it's possible for a credit score to be negative, mine probably was. Now, I don't think it is. I think the lowest you can be is 300. So it was probably like 301. And my finances were a complete and total disaster because of the choices that I made in this relationship. And I had a lot of shame and embarrassment around getting myself into that mess because I should have known better. So obviously, not having a grown man child as part of my household, my finances improved quite a bit once I broke up with him. But what I realized as I was rebuilding my personal finances and, leaving that money stress behind me was it got me really curious as to why people, smart people like me, who are on the honor roll, can manage to screw up their finances so thoroughly when I was hearing all these financial professionals say, money's just math. It's all about the numbers. Follow this checklist. And I'm like, why didn't that work for me? I knew in my head what to do, but my heart was pulling me in a different direction. And that's when I really got interested in psychology and behavioral finance. And this was back in the early 2000s. This was 20 plus years ago. So back then, really behavioral finance was in its infancy. And they were only really talking about it in psychology circles. They weren't really talking about it in personal finance or, investing or anything like that. So that's kind of how I got started. And it began gradually where I was volunteering and helping people out. And, I didn't intend to make a career out of financial coaching, but as I did it first as a volunteer and then part-time, I just really fell in love with the transformation that I was seeing with people. And, I don't know, I'm sure there's people in our listening audience who can relate to this, but when you have a purpose that's pulling on your heartstrings, it doesn't matter how much your day job is paying you, right? If you don't have that same purpose. So that's really what led me to start talking about money and emotions, because as I started coaching, as I started teaching classes, etc., I realized that the emotional part was largely left out of the personal finance stuff that's out there. It was essentially like, hey, here's your checklist of stuff to do. And if you just follow this checklist, then you're going to have financial freedom. And then when people would try to do the checklist or the formula or whatever it was, and something blocked them from progressing, they would feel like there's something wrong with them. And so they would say, what's wrong with me that I can't do this? And I would say, well, that's actually the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, what happened to me that is causing me to not be able to progress through this particular thing? Because we do all have a money story. We have things that were imprinted on us when we were very young that are stored down in our unconscious mind that most people aren't even aware that they have a money story.
Yep, absolutely. I listened in one of your episodes how you were talking about your money story was that you had to work hard to make money. And so if money came to you easily, which is common when you are exercising a strength, a gift, a talent, right? If money comes to you easily, well, then you tend to ignore, oh, that was just happenstance. Oh, that's not real. I can't expect that to keep coming. It's not something I can count on, because money has to be hard. It has to be hard to earn money. And so we can literally find ourselves turning away opportunities to make money that are easy or that take less time or that are challenging for other people to do, but that are naturally easy for us to do. Is that a fair assessment of what you said?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think what's frustrating is sometimes, at least in my situation, when I would see other people making money easily, I would think that's not fair. They didn't work hard. But they didn't have that story. They didn't have that truth wedged down in their unconscious mind the way I did, because they had a completely different upbringing than I
Yeah.
did. And maybe their parents taught them, like, hey, it's easy to make money.
So I just
And
want to, I think that is so important. And if you ask people, what's your money conversation, they may literally, and I know when I was a coach and I would ask people this, they would say they didn't have one. And I
like,
thought,
I don't know.
that's funny. Chances are you probably do. You may just not have ever put words to it or thought about it. And we do an exercise and then eventually we can kind of see where that stands. But I want to put it in the context, bringing it back to some of the stuff we do at White Glove, because whenever you are in a human conversation, an interpersonal relationship, talking to someone, these sorts of things come up. And for financial advisors and planners and guides, when they are experts and they're talking to people who may have that desire to get some help about their finances, I just want to point out a couple of things that you said that I think are so critical and that I want these guys to think about. So when you're doing a workshop and you're meeting these people, and then perhaps they're coming in for an appointment with you one-on-one, you want to have in your mind some of the stuff that Christine has shared here that could be happening for these people in their minds. They could be coming in thinking, like you said, I'm a smart person and I had a checklist. I had a budget. I know better. I know how to do this, but I just can't. So obviously something's wrong with me. Or I'm too emotional about money. I pulled all my money out when the stock market started going down and inflation started going up, and I feel horrible about it. So Christine, when you're dealing with people that are going through this, can you help me talk to the advisors who are listening to the show and help them know, how do I address that when I understand, first and foremost, just acknowledging that could be what's happening for somebody when they're sitting in my office, because I, as an advisor, want to get them the best returns that I can. I want to make them successful so they're thrilled with me, right? But what if I can't get them to do the right behavior? What if despite what I tell them, they make the wrong choices?
Yeah, it's common, and it is very frustrating for the advisor. And I think the most important thing for financial professionals to understand is that money is emotional. And that's not my opinion. It's actually science. So scientists have determined that the moment of decision happens in the same part of our brain that processes emotion. And they found it out by accident because they were doing this study with a group of stroke patients that just had damage in the part of their brain that processed emotion. So they had a hard time expressing emotion themselves and interpreting it in other people. And they took a break during the study for lunch, and they asked everybody, do you want a chicken sandwich or a hamburger? And none of them could pick. And then they were like, uh-oh.
None of the stroke patients could pick.
No, none of them could make a decision because that's where the damage was in the brain. So we cannot remove emotion completely from the equation. And I think understanding that first and foremost is really the foundation, because once we have said, okay, we know we can't remove emotion from the equation, but how can we manage emotions so that the decision we're making right now, we're also going to be happy with later? And what I like to tell, there's a couple of kind of like tricks and tips that I give advisors. And the first and most important thing is we can communicate this with our clients to say, when you're making an important financial decision, it's best to wait until your emotional volume is low. And so I'll tell you what I mean by this. We kind of have these two competing voices, right? We have the voice of reason, and then we have the voice of our emotions. The voice of reason is always present. And I almost like to think of these like two different radio stations. We can think of the voice of reason kind of like the classical music station, right? It's very low, it's very chill. You know, when a new song comes on, it's usually not jarring, right? There aren't fluctuations in volume. It's just very soft and very steady, and it's always there. Now, our emotions are the exact opposite, right? So our emotions are kind of like the top 100 hits. Like, we don't know if it's going to be like death metal or a rap song or some sweet love song, right? And the
Let me tell you, I don't want to know a day when death metal hits the top 100 chart, but that's just me. Okay, keep going.
so with our emotions, the volume fluctuates depending on how we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And we experience this all throughout the day, right? Something happens, we watch something on TV, we get a phone call or a text, we get good news, we get bad news, something upsets us on social media. And so we have these spikes of volume, so to speak, in our emotions. The voice of reason is just it's here, there's no spikes, it's just nice and solid. We make the best decisions relative to our money when we can hear both the voice of reason and the voice of our emotions.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example? And I love that. I think that's a really good analogy. And you're not only saying advisors should include the emotional channel in the
Yes.
conversation as well as the rational, but when it's a bit more calm, but just making sure that we acknowledge that each of these channels has input that need to be acknowledged and validated. But I also love just the idea of teaching advisors how to actually do more of this. What are some tips that you're giving? And can you kind of give an example of when somebody, like again, on your podcast, you made an example about somebody's daughter and the parents weren't going to buy a car. They were never going to co-sign. Do you remember that example? Could you? Because I thought that was a really good way to illustrate the point about, despite the fact that an advisor's clients may be very rational, making good decisions, may have certain values and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Emotion may make them completely change their mind and take a different route. And that could be really frustrating to an advisor if you don't understand and can't see that coming. So can you kind of talk through that example a little bit?
Yeah. You might have clients, set of parents who, are very clear, like, hey, we're never going to co-sign a loan for anybody. That's just our policy, that we're not going to do that. Well, let's just say that was my parents and I was coming out of my horrible relationship with my ex-fiance and my credit was an absolute mess. What if the only way that I could get an apartment was for my parents to co-sign? And they saw that he was emotionally abusive and they saw that he was quickly heading down the road towards being an alcoholic or a drug addict. And I didn't have kids, but what if I did have kids? How fast are they going to change their stance on that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's their daughter. They want her to be safe. That's the most important thing. And they're going to help her however they can. All of a sudden, the policy goes out the window.
Right. So a carefully crafted financial plan that an advisor might have built, an estate plan or a financial plan that they might have built according to whatever values your client said, this is how it's going to be. Right. And then a short while later, as you're working with this client over the years, they may come in and blow up that plan. And I can imagine that could be pretty frustrating for an advisor who has cared. So do you have any tips and tricks for kind of just helping advisors through that transition when they have a client that they know are making an emotional decision about their money? How do you handle that as an advisor who's crafted that plan?
Yeah. One of the things that I like to do with my clients when there is an emotional decision, because it's not just money that weighs in to the equation, right? We value our relationships, we value our family. And when it comes to situations like this, I will say, okay, let's think about all the possible outcomes if we go ahead with this decision. What's the best possible outcome? The best possible outcome is that you're helping your daughter. She's going to get back on her feet. She's not going to be with that guy anymore who's draining her financial resources. So she's going to start paying off her collection. She's going to start building her credit. Maybe after 2 years, she'll be able to qualify to stay in that apartment without you being a co-signer, and there's no financial repercussions to you at all. Like,
Mhm.
that's the best case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? She signs a year lease. 2 months later, she gets back with her ex, moves out, defaults on the apartment. The apartment complex comes back to you and says,
Pay up.
you're responsible for all 12 months. Oh, and she left the apartment a mess. So your security deposit is gone and there's a big cleanup fee, right? What's the potential damage here, right? Probably what's going to happen is something in between those two extremes, but just articulating those two extremes and saying, if this worst case scenario happened, how is it going to affect your family and your finances?
Mhm.
Because it could negatively impact you helping pay for your son's college,
Mhm.
right? If all of a sudden you have to step in and pay this $1,000, $1,200 rent bill, and that was money that you had earmarked for your son's college, this could have unintended consequences if we have this worst case scenario. Are you prepared to handle that? Are you okay with that?
I think that's perfect. So just literally talking through the various financial impacts. And as an advisor, they're doing this all the time. They're running different
Yeah.
models, different scenarios, right? So here's your asset map. Here's what your plan is. As we, make a decision here, here's the impact it looks like over here. So acknowledging that the emotional side is at play, acknowledging that it makes sense and that it is also valid, running the plan A, plan B, the pros, the cons, and looking at them just in black and white, very pragmatically as a plan. There's a finite pool of money. We shift some from here, we put it over there. This is what's going to look like. And then asking them to make that choice. Is that the choice you want to make? Right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
because ultimately it's their money and they're going to do what they want to. And as the financial professional, all we can do is say, it's my responsibility to tell you these range of outcomes. I hope you don't make this decision over here, or maybe there's some variables that we can change in this situation that is going to mitigate this worst case scenario.
And also acknowledging, as an advisor, your internal bias. Your job is to, you probably got into this business thinking, I just want to get the best returns I can. I want to get the best, take their net worth. I want to grow it by X%. These are my internal metrics that I have. But one thing I used to, when I was a coach, I would ask my clients oftentimes when we were trying to make a decision, what are we trying to solve for? What actually is the goal? Or the problem? What is the goal or the problem we're trying to solve for? And it could be our goal or our problem is to, we have to have this much money. Or our goal is we want to grow this much money. That's a thing. We want a portfolio that demonstrates this level of return on investment. Great. Okay. But if we're coming up where the client is changing their mind and whatever, it might be worthwhile asking that question again. What problem are we solving for? A new priority has arisen. And that priority is the stability of this child. And if we take care of this daughter in this moment where she has clear demonstrated need, and we evaluate the options that come from those and the consequences and the impact that's going to have, we've decided that we're solving for this problem now. And money is a solution to solve that problem in this way, right? So just noting that the problem that we're solving for over time can and likely will change for your clients.
Yeah. And I think when you see your client stuck in a pattern, that's when you need to say, there's something here. There's something deeper here that I'm unaware of, and they may even be unaware of. And so we can start asking some questions and diving deeper to figure out, what is it that's going on here, really? Is there some sort of, pattern around emotional spending where, the person spends because they're lonely or they're bored or they're anxious or they're mad at their ex or whatever the case may be. And sometimes just asking people how they feel about money and listening to their language can point to some things that may be sore spots, right? So if someone were to have asked me 10 years ago, how do you feel about making money in your business? And I'd be like, oh, that's hard. And the company that I used to work for, it was in manufacturing, and making money in manufacturing, 9 times out of 10, it's hard. There's not a lot of companies that have lasted, 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years in the manufacturing sector because it is tough. And so that was my whole frame of mind when I started my business. This is going to be tough.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it tougher on myself than it had to be. I undercharged, I hated sales. I mean, I had some pretty big obstacles when it came to the growing of my business at the beginning. And I basically had to use my own tools on myself to say, okay, obviously I'm running up against some blocks here. What's going on?
I think bottom line is you're making some great points here that financial advisors, if you can understand the emotional side of money, if you can bring that into the conversation with your clients, likely the payoff for you is that you're going to be able to understand your clients better and also help them understand themselves and motivate some behavior that is going to serve both of you. And then also, I think it's really important for financial advisors to maybe even take a look at themselves the way you did when you started your business, because all of you are you're entrepreneurs as well, and looking at what sort of conversations you're having with yourself about that, making money and being in business for yourself. I think that's super critical. And having been an entrepreneur myself and running my own company and having to sell myself, I had a lot of the same things that you're talking about. I think it's just so common. We get in our own way. So I think it's just really powerful to kind of bottom line it. And I would love if you have just kind of a closing remark here before I ask you our last question. Just what is it that you want our listeners today to walk away with, our financial advisors to walk away with when they're thinking about the emotional side of money? What is just one nugget of wisdom you want to leave them with?
Well, I think one of the greatest skills that they can develop is emotional intelligence, because if you're blending the emotional intelligence with the wise financial advice, you're going to win both the heads and the hearts of your clients, and you're not going to lack in the referrals department, because when people know that they are being taken care of on an emotional level, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. I mean, you're really not. And this doesn't mean that you necessarily have to cry with them, but it does mean that you are noticing when they are struggling with an emotion or having an emotional moment, and giving them space to experience it without trying to rush them through that or rush them out the door. And you have to get comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable sometimes.
Great wisdom there. Thank you for that. And I always ask at the end of the segment, Christine, you're a very successful person. You've helped coach a lot of clients through some crazy obstacles to success. Do you have your own sort of success metric or definition of success you want to share with us?
For me, it's not the numbers, how many people you've helped, what your revenue is, what your net worth is. To me, it's impact. It's how many people have you positively impacted. And I don't think that we will ever know in this lifetime the ripple effect that we can have on people.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'll just have someone pop up on social media or in my inbox and say, I've been following you for 3 years. I followed all of your advice. We just paid off all our debt. This is the first time I've heard from them, right? And so a lot of times we as financial professionals can think we're putting all this great advice out there. We never really know the positive impact that our words and our actions are going to have on people. And so for me, it's really, if I'm doing the right things, I don't really need to even worry about the success. If I feel like I'm impacting people positively on a daily basis through whatever I'm doing, personally or professionally, then I'm just going to let God or the universe take care of the results and the numbers.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of the advisors listening to the show are feeling the same way, making that positive impact. And the empowerment and education that you provide your clients, the guidance, the things that you make possible for them, the heavy burdens you remove from them by helping them make those good financial decisions is amazing. So, Christine, I really appreciate your time today, and I want to thank you for being my guest on the FAST podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All right. This has absolutely been fantastic. Of course, I'm geeking out over here with just listening to the two of you, but I do have a question for both of you, and I'd love an answer from you both because I think you bring different perspectives to the table. The bottom line is advisors have to build relationships with their clients. Relationships come with positive and negative things, right? Once we have that relationship, there's nobody on the planet that I've ever met, at least, that's like, what I'd really like to do is I would like to shame people. I'd like to really just get a laugh or two out of someone's shame. However, the problem is that we all feel that if we've done something wrong. How do you help advisors specifically communicate with their clients that no matter what you've done, no matter what decision you've made, because a lot of times, Christine, like you said, somebody already makes a decision and then they have to go and talk to their advisor about it. How do we help the advisor create an environment where there is no shame? Because you don't want to approach somebody and tell them what you've done in an embarrassing way, right? So how do we get the clients to be able to say, hey, here's what I've done. I know it wasn't what we talked about. How do I fix it? How does the advisor make it so it's a safe place, so there's no shame involved, so they actually do have that conversation? Because clients will just shut down or they won't communicate for months and months and months, and it just makes it worse. So, Lara, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
So I love that question. And one of the first things that I always try to tell our clients is you have to be relatable. And part of that, and I think the story that Christine shared was really powerful. One of the reasons she's relatable to her clients is because she's honest about having made mistakes herself, despite the fact that she had an accounting degree and knew better. She knew how the budget works and she knows what positive and negative cash flow looks like. And yet she still found herself in this horrible situation. And I think for advisors, I mean, gosh, I'm sure that there's some mistake you've made, some purchase, some stock, something you just fell in love with for whatever reason. You made a decision and one way or another, it led to some remorse, something that didn't work out well. If you can share an example like that with your client, if you can relate to them, if you can say, yeah, you know what, we have a similar family situation going, whatever, maybe someone's talking about estate planning is one of the things. We do a lot of estate planning workshops, and people come in and they have some really crazy stories about, we have my daughter getting divorced and it's really messy and we're trying to figure out how to disentangle some blah, blah, blah. If the advisor can share a story that they've been through themselves, you know what, that happened with my mother-in-law, this happened, blah, blah, blah. If you share a story, share a personal story that is relevant to whatever that shameful experience is that your client is sharing, then that's going to make them trust you just a little bit more and appreciate you because they've been vulnerable. And
Absolutely.
You sharing how, yeah, I've done that too, takes away just a little bit of that vulnerability and helps them relate to you. So being relatable, sharing a relevant story, maybe from yourself or someone you know closely, will help.
Yeah. Christine?
Well, I would definitely agree with that. The other thing too is just approaching the whole relationship from the beginning to say, we're not going to do this perfectly, right? We're making this gorgeous plan for you, and I'm showing it to you on the screen. This is not going to go perfectly. And what's going to happen is life is going to happen. When that happens, I want to be that person that you call to jump in with solutions and to help you. And there's probably going to be times where you make a decision without me and you're going to feel bad, and you might even feel ashamed, and you might even avoid me. That's the last thing I want to happen. If you make a bad mistake, I still want to be the first person that you call.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I prefer you call me in the beginning of the situation so I can help you to make the best decision for you and your family. But I know that's not always going to go that way. But I want you to know there's no judgment. There's no shame. My job is to help you and to have money support your happiness. And whatever part I can play in that, I want to play as big a part in that as you will let me.
Fantastic.
And I think just opening with that at the beginning of the relationship and setting that tone is going to help so much.
Absolutely. Well, I know that we will have links to your information, Christine, as far as how advisors can reach out to you, how other listeners can reach out to you. Lara, there are advisors listening to this right now that aren't currently working with White Glove, and maybe they're just listening and they've tuned in because another advisor told them to. How about you give them your contact information? So, and anybody who wants to reach Christine, I'm sure can reach out to you as well to get her contact information.
Absolutely. You can always reach us on our website, whiteglove.com, or info@whiteglove.com, and we will be happy to get back in touch with you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. This has been amazing. And of course, our last thank you goes to the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Fast Podcast with Lara Galloway. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Lara comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at White Glove, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the FAST Podcast, Financial Advisor Strategy Talks with Lara Galloway, your go-to source designed to help you grow your business. Have questions about the topics covered during the show? Visit our website at www.whiteglove.com or email us at info@whiteglove.com. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of White Glove. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial services provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.